Imagine looking in the mirror and thinking you know the person staring back. You've known them all your life. You've memorized their habits, their reactions, their quirks. You call them you. But what if I told you that this sense of self, this intimate certainty, is mostly an illusion? What if the very idea that you know yourself is a carefully constructed story, a story your brain tells to make sense of its endless complexity? Every thought, every feeling, every memory is filtered, predicted, and stitched together like a puzzle you didn't know you were assembling. And in this process, your experience of being you, the thing you assume is solid and unchanging, is constantly shifting, constantly evolving, constantly a work of art your own mind is painting in real time. You think you are a singular, continuous entity, but what you are is more like a symphony of predictions, sensations, and interpretations playing together in a seamless illusion that feels real. Tonight, we will explore why this matters, not just for understanding the self, but for discovering the profound possibilities that emerge when you realize that you are far more malleable, far more alive, and far more mysterious than you ever imagined. The sense that you have of yourself as a coherent, continuous individual is one of the most compelling illusions your brain produces. From the moment you wake up in the morning, you navigate the world assuming that there is a single entity behind your experiences, a stable you who observes, decides, and acts. You assume that your thoughts, feelings, and memories belong to this singular self, and that you understand its nature with some degree of certainty. But when we look closely at how the brain constructs our sense of identity, it becomes clear that what you think of as yourself is less a fixed entity and more a sophisticated model generated by your mind to predict and organize experience. This model is designed to integrate countless streams of sensory input, memory, and emotion into a coherent narrative. But coherence does not equate to truth. Your brain is constantly filtering, selecting, and interpreting information, creating a story about who you are that feels real precisely because it is consistent enough to guide your actions. It is this consistency that gives the impression of a continuous, unified self. But in reality, what you call you is a dynamic process that is continuously updated. Every sensation, every thought, and every reaction is first interpreted by this internal model before it reaches conscious awareness. The feelings you believe are spontaneous and authentic are, in fact, predictions your brain generates based on prior experiences and expected outcomes. This predictive mechanism allows you to navigate complex environments efficiently, but it also shapes your sense of identity, giving you the impression that there is an unchanging self behind all your experiences. Memory plays a central role in this construction. You rely on memories to tell you who you are, to provide continuity between past and present, and to predict the future. But memories are not perfect recordings of events. They are reconstructed each time they are recalled, influenced by current beliefs, desires, and emotional states. As a result, your understanding of your own history, and consequently of yourself, is constantly being rewritten. The narrative you hold about yourself may feel stable, but it is in fact flexible and subject to the biases and limitations of the brain's predictive machinery. Our sense of agency, the feeling that we are in control of our thoughts and actions, is similarly constructed. Decisions emerge not from a central executive observing from above, but from the interplay of multiple neural processes, many of which operate outside conscious awareness. You experience choice and volition as part of the narrative your brain generates, but the actual mechanisms are far more complex and less linear than intuition suggests. What you perceive as intentional, consistent behavior is in fact the outcome of countless micro, predictions, and feedback loops, all integrated into a model that presents a smooth, coherent self to conscious awareness. Emotion is another layer in this illusion. Emotions feel immediate and compelling, as though they are spontaneous reactions to the world, yet each emotional response is shaped by prior experiences, expectations, and predictions about what will happen next. Your brain anticipates how you will feel in a given situation and constructs the emotional experience accordingly, meaning that even your inner emotional life is filtered through predictive models rather than being a direct reflection of reality. Social interaction further reinforces the illusion of a stable self. From early childhood, we learn to interpret our own behavior in the context of how others perceive us, adjusting our actions and beliefs to fit expectations and social norms. This feedback loop strengthens the sense of a coherent identity as your brain integrates external cues with internal predictions to produce a version of yourself that appears consistent to both you and others. Yet beneath this apparent coherence lies fluidity. Situations change, new experiences emerge, and the brain continuously updates its predictions, subtly altering the story of who you are. These updates are often invisible to conscious awareness, creating the impression that the self is unchanging when in fact it is in constant flux. Neurological studies have shown that different aspects of identity, such as autobiographical memory, emotional experience, and decision-making, are processed in distributed networks across the brain rather than in a single locus. This decentralization further underscores the idea that the self is not a singular, unitary entity, but a process arising from the interaction of multiple neural systems. Cultural narratives and language also play a critical role in shaping the sense of self. The categories and labels provided by society influence how you interpret experiences and integrate them into your personal story. What you consider to be stable traits or inherent qualities may in fact reflect culturally reinforced patterns of thinking and behavior. In other words, the you that feels innate and immutable is heavily scaffolded by external frameworks that guide the brain's predictive modeling. Conscious reflection, while seemingly a tool for self-discovery, operates within the same predictive system. When you introspect, you are not accessing a pure, unfiltered self. You are observing and interpreting the outputs of predictive mechanisms. Even self-knowledge is itself a construction, shaped by the brain's need to maintain consistency, coherence, and predictive accuracy. The sense of self is further complicated by the role of unconscious processes. Many of the computations that generate your experiences occur beneath the threshold of awareness. You may believe that your thoughts, preferences, and values are directly accessible, but much of what drives your behavior is invisible, operating through patterns, habits, and prior expectations that you cannot consciously inspect. This means that your conscious self is only a small window into a far larger, dynamic system generating the illusion of identity. Recognizing the constructed nature of the self does not diminish its significance or richness. It reframes it. The self is a flexible, adaptive model that allows you to navigate the world, make decisions, form relationships, and experience meaning. Its apparent stability is a testament to the brain's remarkable capacity to integrate complexity into a usable narrative. Yet understanding that this stability is a construction opens the door to curiosity, insight, and transformation. You are not a fixed object to be fully known, but a dynamic process that can be observed, questioned, and reshaped. This perspective shifts the way you relate to your thoughts, emotions, and experiences. Rather than clinging to an illusion of unchanging identity, you can explore the ways in which the brain creates patterns, habits, and stories, and begin to see yourself as an evolving project rather than a static entity. It also offers profound implications for empathy and understanding others. Just as your sense of self is constructed, so too are the selves of those around you. Recognizing that identity is a dynamic process allows for a more nuanced view of human behavior, one that accounts for the interplay of prediction, context, and adaptation. It suggests that change is not only possible, but inherent in the very mechanisms that produce the self, and that our experiences of limitation or rigidity are often reflections of predictive models rather than absolute truths. In exploring this concept, one encounters the paradox at the heart of human experience. The self feels real, continuous, and coherent, yet it is fundamentally a controlled hallucination, a story woven from predictions, sensations, memories, and expectations. It is a story that your brain tells so effectively that you cannot step outside it. Yet it is precisely in recognizing this narrative quality that one gains the potential to understand, appreciate, and even guide the evolution of the self. Ultimately, the first keynote reminds us that the self is not a fixed object to be known with certainty. It is a complex, adaptive, predictive process that produces the illusion of continuity and coherence. Our intuition that we understand ourselves deeply is challenged by the realization that what we call me is a story generated by the brain, a model designed to integrate perception, memory, emotion, and action into a coherent whole. By appreciating the constructed nature of identity, we open the door to a deeper, more flexible, and more compassionate understanding of who we are and how we experience the world. Our conscious experience, the vivid, immediate sense of being alive and aware, is not a passive reflection of the world, but an active construction of the brain. Every sight, sound, touch, thought, and emotion is first interpreted, predicted, and generated by complex neural machinery before it reaches conscious awareness. What we experience as reality is a controlled hallucination, a best guess model created by the brain to make sense of incoming sensory information and to guide adaptive behavior. When you see a tree, you are not perceiving the tree directly. Your brain is predicting what it expects to be there based on prior experience, contextual cues, and patterns it has learned over a lifetime. This predictive process is rapid and largely unconscious, so seamlessly integrated into perception that it feels immediate and accurate. The sensation of solidity, color, depth, and movement arises not solely from the raw sensory input, but from the brain's interpretation of that input. What you experience as real is therefore always a simulation, a controlled hallucination calibrated by sensory feedback and shaped by expectations. Consciousness is a predictive interface, not a passive mirror, and it is remarkable in how convincingly it renders these predictions as reality. When you reach out to touch a cup of coffee, the feeling of warmth, texture, and resistance is not a simple registration of physical stimuli, but a dynamic prediction generated by your nervous system. The brain combines sensory input with expectations about how the cup should feel based on prior encounters with similar objects. The moment-to-moment experience of touch. Taste sight is therefore a continuous negotiation between prediction and incoming data. When predictions are accurate, perception feels seamless and effortless. When they are violated, surprise, confusion, or uncertainty emerges, signaling the brain to update its model. This predictive mechanism extends beyond perception to emotions, thought, and self-awareness. Your feelings are not raw reactions, but anticipated responses to internal and external conditions generated to optimize your interaction with the world. Anxiety, for example, is not merely an immediate response to danger, but a prediction that certain outcomes will be harmful or threatening. Happiness emerges as a prediction of reward and fulfillment. In every case, consciousness represents the brain's ongoing effort to anticipate what is happening, what will happen next, and how to respond effectively. The notion of a controlled hallucination implies that reality is always filtered, interpreted, and reconstructed by the brain. What you perceive as a stable, external world is a product of both sensory input and the brain's predictions, intertwined so seamlessly that they appear inseparable. The color you see, the sound you hear, and the sense of touch you feel are all partly inventions of the brain, designed to generate a coherent, actionable experience rather than a literal copy of the external world. This has profound implications for how we understand perception and consciousness. It means that our understanding of reality is always limited, shaped by the brain's assumptions, prior knowledge, and adaptive goals. Two people may look at the same object and experience it differently, not because the object itself has changed, but because their brains generate distinct predictive models. Even within one individual, perception can fluctuate based on context, attention, expectations, and prior experiences. Illusions and hallucinations provide a striking demonstration of this principle. When visual illusions deceive the eye, the brain is revealing its predictive nature. It fills in gaps, resolves ambiguity, and interprets patterns in ways that make sense based on prior knowledge. Hallucinations, whether spontaneous or drug-induced, are extreme examples of prediction operating without sufficient sensory constraint, producing experiences that feel real despite being detached from external stimuli. The same mechanisms that allow us to navigate the world efficiently can therefore create entirely convincing realities that do not correspond to objective facts. The predictive nature of consciousness also explains the fluid and constructed nature of the self. That experiences the world, the one making decisions, feeling emotions, and remembering the past is itself a product of prediction. The brain models not only the external environment, but also the body, internal states, and ongoing patterns of activity, generating a coherent narrative that constitutes the sense of self. This narrative is continuously updated based on sensory feedback, emotional signals, and social context, producing a version of selfhood that feels stable yet is inherently flexible. Your brain predicts not only the world around you, but also your own reactions and states, creating an integrated model that guides action and interpretation. Even introspection is a form of prediction. When you reflect on your thoughts or analyze your feelings, your conscious mind is observing and interpreting outputs of predictive processes, constructing a narrative that feels authentic and immediate. The experience of awareness is therefore not a window onto objective reality, but a window onto the brain's best guesses, finely tuned over time to enhance survival, decision-making, and social interaction. This perspective challenges deeply held intuitions about perception and consciousness. We are inclined to believe that our experiences provide a direct representation of reality and that our minds are transparent observers of the world. In fact, every experience is mediated, filtered, and shaped by predictive models that prioritize coherence, efficiency, and adaptiveness over literal accuracy. Our perceptions are compelling precisely because they are controlled hallucinations calibrated against sensory input, making errors rare and reality feel stable. The brain achieves this by integrating multiple layers of prediction, from low-level sensory expectations to high-level conceptual frameworks, all operating simultaneously. Sensory input constantly informs and adjusts predictions, creating a feedback loop in which perception is both generated and corrected in real time. Consciousness emerges from this dynamic interplay, producing a continuous stream of experience that feels seamless, coherent, and vivid. Recognizing that consciousness is a controlled hallucination changes how we understand experience, knowledge, and even free will. It highlights the fluidity of reality as experienced and underscores the importance of context, expectation, and prior experience in shaping perception. It illuminates the way the brain constructs meaning from the raw data of sensation and emphasizes that what we perceive as real is not a simple reflection of the world, but a carefully orchestrated simulation designed to guide adaptive behavior. This understanding allows for a more nuanced view of human behavior, cognition, and emotion. It explains why different people perceive the same events differently, why memory is reconstructive, why illusions and hallucinations are possible, and why the self can feel stable even as it is constantly changing. The brain's predictions generate the experience of coherence, continuity, and reality. But beneath this surface, everything is provisional, flexible, and shaped by ongoing computation. Consciousness is therefore best understood as a controlled hallucination, a prediction-driven interface that enables perception, action, and reflection. It is a remarkable achievement of the brain, producing rich, continuous experience while managing uncertainty, integrating sensory information, and anticipating future events. In this framework, the boundaries between self and world, perception and reality, become more fluid. The world we experience is inseparable from the brain's predictions, and the mind we inhabit is inseparable from the process of prediction itself. Every moment of awareness is a negotiation between expectation and evidence, between prediction and correction, producing an experience that is compelling, coherent, and yet fundamentally constructed. The insight that consciousness is a controlled hallucination also reframes questions about knowledge, certainty, and understanding. What we see, hear, feel, and believe is not a direct apprehension of reality, but a generation of the brain that integrates prediction, sensation, and context. Understanding this allows for a deeper appreciation of perception, awareness, and the complex machinery that produces the experience of being alive. It reveals that what feels immediate and undeniable is always filtered through layers of prediction and interpretation, highlighting the creativity, adaptability, and sophistication of the mind in constructing reality. By acknowledging the predictive nature of consciousness, We gain insight into the malleability of perception, the constructed quality of experience, and the potential for self-reflection and change. We see that the richness of subjective experience arises not from passive observation, but from active construction, and that the mind is constantly shaping, refining, and simulating reality to guide thought and action. The self that you experience, the you, that feels coherent, stable, and continuous across time, is intimately intertwined with perception, expectation, and interpretation. Yet the link between what you perceive and the objective reality around you is far from direct. Every thought, sensation, and emotion that reaches consciousness is filtered through layers of prediction and prior knowledge, shaped by patterns learned over a lifetime, and continuously updated to maintain a coherent narrative. What you perceive as yourself or the world is a product of the brain's best guess about what is happening, and this guess is informed by incomplete, noisy, and sometimes conflicting sensory information. The world you see and the self you experience are therefore constructed, not simply discovered. We tend to assume that our perceptions are straightforward and accurate, that the objects, people, and events we encounter exist independently of us in precisely the form we perceive. We believe that when we see a chair, we are seeing the chair itself. And when we remember an experience, we are recalling it faithfully. Yet decades of research in neuroscience and psychology reveal a very different picture. Perception is not a passive recording of reality, but an active process of prediction and interpretation. Memory is reconstructive rather than literal, and even our sense of identity is continuously negotiated by the brain. Our brain constructs reality by combining sensory input with prior expectations and learned patterns. When signals from the eyes, ears, and other senses arrive, they are not simply read and reported. Instead, the brain compares incoming data to internal predictions, reconciling discrepancies, filling in missing information, and emphasizing patterns that are likely based on context and experience. This predictive filtering creates the subjective experience of continuity and coherence. Yet it also means that what you perceive is always a controlled interpretation, not an objective truth. This gap between perception and reality can be subtle or striking, depending on circumstances. Optical illusions, auditory illusions, and phenomena like change blindness demonstrate how the brain can generate experiences that feel vivid and certain while deviating from physical reality. In daily life, this filtering is less obvious because the brain's predictions are highly effective, but the principle remains: what we experience as the world is a negotiated construction, and our consciousness seamlessly integrates predictions with sensory input to produce a unified sense of reality. This principle extends to the sense of self in profound ways. The you, that makes decisions, feels emotions, and maintains memories is not a single entity, but a dynamic process arising from interactions among brain networks, bodily states, and environmental context. The self is a model, a running simulation, designed to maintain coherence, anticipate outcomes, and coordinate behavior. The traits, preferences, and narratives you associate with yourself emerge from this predictive modeling. This is why introspection can reveal surprises. The deeper you examine your thoughts and behaviors, the more you realize that much of what drives you operates outside conscious awareness, shaped by patterns, habits, and automatic predictions that feel intimate and familiar, but are only partially accessible. Social interaction is a powerful lens through which this gap between perception and reality becomes apparent. Your sense of self is deeply influenced by the presence, feedback, and expectations of others. From early childhood, you learn to interpret yourself in relation to others, adopting internalized models of how you appear, how you are valued, and how your actions are interpreted. That seems stable is constantly being calibrated against external reality. And yet the calibration itself is subject to the same predictive processes that construct perception. As a result, the experience of being a coherent, continuous self is reinforced by social feedback, but it remains a construction shaped by prediction, expectation, and selective attention. Memory plays a crucial role in bridging perception and reality, linking past experiences to present awareness. Memories are not recordings stored in pristine form. They are reconstructions, dynamically influenced by current beliefs, emotional states, and contextual cues. Each act of recollection is an opportunity for the brain to update and reshape the narrative of self, which means that the you who remembers is subtly different from the you who originally experienced an event. This constant updating produces continuity and stability in experience, but also creates the illusion of a self that is more fixed than it truly is. Decision-making illustrates the interplay between perception, prediction, and identity. Choices emerge not from a singular executive self observing the brain's operations, but from complex interactions between multiple networks predicting outcomes, evaluating consequences, and weighing probabilities. The conscious feeling of agency, the sense that I am deciding, is generated after these computations, woven into a narrative that maintains coherence and supports ongoing engagement with the world. What feels like deliberate, rational decision-making is in fact a carefully orchestrated story constructed by the brain to reconcile prediction with experience. The body also contributes to the construction of reality and self. Interoceptive signals, the continuous flow of information from the body regarding heartbeat, respiration, gut activity, and other physiological states, are integrated into predictive models to generate the feeling of being alive and embodied. These signals shape perception, mood, and the sense of presence in ways that often go unnoticed, yet they are central to the experience of selfhood. What you perceive as an internal state is already an interpretation, a prediction generated by the brain to maintain coherence and prepare action. Attention and expectation further shape the bridge between perception and reality. The brain does not process all sensory information equally. It prioritizes signals deemed relevant, suppresses noise, and constructs salient narratives to guide thought and behavior. What you notice, remember, and respond to is determined by these predictive mechanisms, which means that reality is filtered not only by sensation, but by expectation, relevance, and cognitive frameworks. This is why two people witnessing the same event may have dramatically different recollections or interpretations, and why your perception of yourself and the world can differ from objective measurement in subtle but significant ways. Consciousness itself is therefore a form of ongoing interpretation. Awareness does not directly access reality. It receives the output of prediction and integration processes designed to produce coherent experience. The vividness, immediacy, and conviction of perception and thought give the impression that reality is being presented, as it exists independently of the observer, but this impression is itself part of the brain's construction. By recognizing the gap between perception and reality, we gain insight into the malleable, dynamic nature of the self. Understanding that identity is filtered, predicted, and reconstructed opens possibilities for reflection, adaptation, and change. The you that seems unchanging is revealed as a narrative maintained by predictive processes, continuously updated to navigate complex environments and social contexts. This recognition reshapes the relationship to personal experience, highlighting that the mind is not a passive observer of truth, but an active creator of reality, weaving together sensation, expectation, memory, and emotion into a cohesive but inherently flexible model. Awareness of this process encourages a deeper appreciation of perception, identity, and human experience. It suggests that our experience of coherence, stability, and understanding is not a guarantee of objective accuracy, but a testament to the sophistication of the brain's predictive abilities. We inhabit a world that is simultaneously real and interpreted, objective and constructed, familiar and endlessly surprising, and our sense of self is inseparable from the process by which the brain generates, refines, and sustains the narrative of experience. In acknowledging the gap between perception and reality, one begins to see the fluidity of experience, the reconstructive nature of memory, the predictive character of thought, and the creative orchestration that underlies consciousness. It reveals that what feels immediate and undeniable is always filtered, shaped, and synthesized, and that the self and the world we perceive are inseparable products of the brain's ongoing negotiation between prediction and evidence. This understanding invites curiosity, reflection, and engagement with the mind, not as a static container of truths, but as a dynamic, adaptive system whose experiences are vivid, meaningful, and yet always provisional, revealing the gap between what is perceived and what exists and highlighting the extraordinary sophistication with which the brain constructs reality and selfhood. Identity is often assumed to be a fixed and stable thing, a singular entity that persists over time. Yet closer examination reveals that the self is not a static object, but a dynamic, ongoing process. Every thought, feeling, perception, and action contributes to an evolving sense of self, continuously shaped by both internal neural processes and external environmental interactions. The brain constructs a coherent narrative of identity by integrating sensory input, memory, prediction, and social feedback. Yet this narrative is constantly updated, revised, and sometimes contradicted by new experiences. What you consider to be you is less a bounded object than a running simulation, a model generated to anticipate, interpret, and respond to the world efficiently and adaptively. Even the most intimate sense of self, the feeling that you are a single, continuous entity, is emergent from these predictive processes rather than being a literal feature of the brain. Consciousness contributes to this process by producing a continuous stream of experience, giving the impression of stability and continuity. However, the experience of a stable identity is itself a product of predictive modeling. The brain stitches together sensations, thoughts, and memories to create a seamless story that feels consistent over time. This construction allows for effective decision-making, coordinated action, and social interaction, as it provides a coherent perspective from which to navigate the world. Yet beneath this apparent coherence, the self is fundamentally fluid, shifting moment to moment in response to internal states, new information, and environmental conditions. Memory plays a critical role in this fluidity, linking past experiences to present awareness and projecting into the future. But memory is inherently reconstructive, influenced by context, emotion, and expectation. Each recollection is not a perfect replay of an event, but a reassembly guided by predictive models and the current state of the self. In this way, the narrative of identity is perpetually rewritten, producing both the illusion of continuity and the reality of constant evolution. Social interaction further demonstrates the processual nature of the self. From early childhood, we learn to interpret ourselves in relation to others, to anticipate reactions, and to adjust behavior accordingly. Social feedback is continuously integrated into the predictive models that constitute the self, reinforcing patterns, shaping narratives, and influencing both conscious and unconscious behavior. Our identities are therefore constructed through ongoing interaction with other people, as the brain continuously predicts how the self should appear and respond in context. The body itself is another crucial component of the self process. Interoceptive signals, which provide continuous information about the internal state of the body, are integrated into models that generate a sense of being embodied and alive. Physical sensations, posture, balance, and physiological feedback all contribute to the construction of the self, influencing perception, emotion, and behavior in subtle but profound ways. What feels like an innate or stable identity is inseparable from the continuous flow of bodily information that the brain interprets and integrates into a coherent sense of self. Emotions are also part of the ongoing process of self-construction. They arise not only from immediate events, but from predictions about how situations will affect the body-mind and social context. Emotional experience informs perception, guides behavior, and provides critical feedback to the brain's predictive models. Feelings of happiness, sadness, fear, and excitement are generated to support adaptive action and social coordination, and they are continuously shaped by ongoing experience, prior expectations, and predictions about the future. The self, therefore, is never a static collection of traits or fixed characteristics. It is a dynamic interplay of body, brain, and environment that continuously generates a coherent narrative. Even introspection, the act of reflecting on thoughts and feelings, is itself a predictive process, integrating sensory information, memory, and expectation to create a sense of understanding. What we experience as self-knowledge is constructed in the same way as perception and emotion arising from models designed to maintain coherence and support effective engagement with the world. The processual nature of the self allows for flexibility and adaptation. Personality traits, preferences, habits, and beliefs are not rigidly fixed, but emerge from ongoing interactions between neural networks, bodily states, and environmental feedback. Change is inherent in the mechanisms that produce the self, whether gradual through development and experience, or rapid in response to new contexts or challenges. Recognizing the self as a process rather than a thing has profound implications for understanding human behavior, emotion, and identity. It shifts the focus from seeking to define or locate a singular essence of the self to observing and appreciating the dynamic systems that generate experience and coherence. It also illuminates why people can change, grow, and adapt throughout life, as the predictive and reconstructive processes of the brain provide the basis for continuous transformation. The interaction between brain, body, and environment also demonstrates that the self is fundamentally relational. Identity is not generated in isolation. It is shaped by engagement with the physical world, social networks, culture and language, expectations, norms, and social cues are continuously integrated into predictive models, influencing both conscious and unconscious aspects of selfhood. The perception of stability is therefore partly a reflection of shared patterns, predictable interactions, and social reinforcement rather than an intrinsic property of an independent self. Conscious awareness of the self provides the illusion of permanence and agency, yet the underlying mechanisms are highly dynamic. The brain constantly predicts and interprets sensory data, memory, and internal states to generate a coherent sense of being. These predictions are continuously corrected and updated, producing a self that feels continuous even though it is, in fact, an emergent property of complex, distributed processes. The self is not a container of traits or a repository of experiences. It is an ongoing construction that coordinates perception, action, and social interaction in a coherent narrative. Even language plays a critical role in shaping this process. The labels, categories, and concepts available in a culture influence how the self is interpreted, narrated, and understood. Thought and communication both reflect and reinforce the models of identity generated by the brain, providing structure, consistency, and meaning to experience. Through language, the self becomes something that can be shared, reflected upon, and reinterpreted, further reinforcing its dynamic, processual nature. Predictive mechanisms within the brain allow the self to anticipate outcomes, plan actions, and adjust behavior, producing a sense of agency that feels seamless and coherent. Yet this sense of control is itself an emergent feature of the predictive system, illustrating that the self is a constructed interface for navigating complex environments rather than a fixed entity with inherent properties. Attention and expectation shape experience in subtle ways, directing awareness to aspects of perception, memory, and social interaction that reinforce a coherent narrative. The brain suppresses irrelevant signals, highlights salient patterns, and maintains continuity, producing the illusion of a stable identity while underlying processes are constantly updating. The malleability of the self explains both the consistency and variability of human behavior. While people exhibit enduring preferences and tendencies, these are emergent properties of predictive, reconstructive processes that can adapt to new information, context, or social feedback. The self is not a static blueprint, but a flexible, adaptive simulation, continuously evolving to optimize perception, action, and interaction. Recognizing the self as a process rather than an object opens new perspectives on personal growth, creativity, and resilience. Change is not a threat to identity, but a reflection of the brain's ongoing generative capacity. Understanding the dynamic nature of the self allows for a more compassionate view of oneself and others, acknowledging that behavior, emotion, and thought are produced by processes rather than fixed characteristics. The self is therefore best understood not as a fixed, knowable entity, but as a fluid, emergent system arising from continuous interaction among brain, body, and environment. Its apparent stability and coherence are maintained through predictive modeling, integration of sensory and social information, and reconstruction of memory and narrative. By embracing this processual view, we gain insight into the flexibility, adaptability, and profound complexity of human identity, recognizing that who we are is always in motion, continuously constructed, and intimately connected to both our internal states and the world around us. Understanding that the self is a constructed, dynamic process has profound implications for how we think about human potential, personal growth, and freedom. For most of our lives, we operate under the assumption that our traits, preferences, and limitations are fixed, that the person we see in the mirror or the thoughts we have are the definitive measure of who we are. We cling to the notion of a stable, unchanging self because it provides comfort, continuity, and a sense of control. Yet, if we recognize that the self is not a fixed object, but an ongoing process generated by the brain, this opens up possibilities that would otherwise remain invisible. It means that change is not only possible, but inherent in the very mechanisms that produce our experience of identity. The brain is constantly predicting, updating, and recalibrating, and so too is the self. Habits, beliefs, emotional patterns, and even personality traits are not immutable facts of life, but emergent properties of adaptive processes. They are shaped by perception, memory, social feedback, and bodily states, all of which are continually interpreted and reconstructed. This understanding reframes the way we approach learning, relationships, and self-development. Rather than struggling against a fixed identity, we can engage with the self as a flexible, malleable system, recognizing that intentional reflection, practice, and exposure to new experiences can rewire patterns and expand possibilities. One of the most liberating consequences of this perspective is the recognition of agency within the predictive system. Even though much of our cognition and behavior operates outside of conscious awareness, consciousness itself is embedded within the brain's predictive machinery, providing a space to observe, reflect, and influence ongoing processes. By intentionally directing attention, challenging assumptions, and experimenting with behavior, we can shape the trajectories of our internal models and thereby influence the narratives that constitute identity. Social and environmental context become essential components of this process. Identity is not formed in isolation. It emerges from interaction with others, from the feedback we receive, and from the expectations embedded in culture and language. By consciously engaging with these contexts, we can introduce variability and novelty that prompt the self to adapt in productive ways. This highlights the importance of relationships, mentorship, education, and community in shaping the capacity for growth. Emotions, too, are not fixed reactions, but predictive constructs that guide behavior and experience. Recognizing that emotional responses are generated to maintain coherence and adapt to context allows for new strategies of emotional regulation. We can learn to observe, reinterpret, and respond differently to experiences, creating flexibility in patterns that once felt immutable. The capacity for emotional change is closely tied to the brain's predictive nature. New experiences, mindful reflection, and altered attention can recalibrate predictions, reshaping emotional responses over time. Memory, which is often assumed to be a static record of past events, also becomes a tool for transformation under this framework. Memories are reconstructed each time they are recalled, integrating current understanding, context, and expectation. This reconstructive process means that the narratives we hold about ourselves are constantly mutable. By consciously revisiting and reframing memories, we can influence the way the self interprets past experiences, reshaping identity in the present and future. The understanding that the self is a process also reframes how we interpret failure, limitation, and struggle. Traits that feel permanent, whether related to temperament, intelligence, or capacity for certain behaviors, are actually emergent from the brain's predictive modeling and the environmental feedback it receives. This perspective emphasizes adaptability over permanence, growth over stasis, and potential over fixed identity. It also fosters compassion, both for oneself and for others, recognizing that behavior and personality are shaped by dynamic processes rather than fixed essences. The idea that identity is malleable intersects with creativity and innovation. If the self is not a rigid object, but a process that can generate new patterns, then human potential is inherently expansive. Novel experiences, challenges, and deliberate practice can reorganize predictive models, allowing for the development of skills, insights, and ways of being that were previously outside the perceived range of possibility. Creativity, then, is not merely the expression of innate talent, but the exploration and reconfiguration of predictive systems in ways that generate new perceptions, behaviors, and experiences. Mindset shifts are another area where this understanding has profound implications. Beliefs about the self, such as fixed intelligence or immutable personality traits, shape the predictions the brain makes and, in turn, the experiences it constructs. By cultivating a growth-oriented mindset, by intentionally challenging assumptions and experimenting with behavior, we can influence the internal predictive models that shape thought, perception, and action. This is not a matter of wishful thinking, but a reflection of the predictive, generative nature of consciousness and selfhood. Understanding the self as a process also has profound implications for mental health and well-being. Conditions that feel like rigid patterns of thought or emotion, whether anxiety, depression, or maladaptive habits, are products of predictive models that have become over-reinforced or biased. Recognizing that these patterns are emergent, constructed, and updatable opens avenues for intervention therapy and self-directed change. The brain's inherent plasticity allows for the recalibration of predictions, the rewriting of narratives, and the development of new behavioral strategies. The malleability of identity encourages experimentation, curiosity, and openness to experience. It suggests that personal development is not about finding or uncovering a true self that has always existed, but about engaging with the processes that generate experience and identity, learning to influence them consciously, and embracing the emergent potential within. By reframing the self as dynamic, we also change our relationship with uncertainty and unpredictability. Rather than fearing the unknown or clinging to rigid patterns, we can approach life as a space of possibility, where the brain's predictive machinery and our engagement with it create new trajectories of growth, learning, and adaptation. Freedom, in this sense, is not the absence of constraint, but the capacity to participate consciously in the processes that generate identity and experience. The insight that the self is a constructed, updatable process shifts the way we think about personal responsibility, creativity, and agency. It emphasizes that change is not external imposition, but an emergent property of the system itself, that effort, reflection, and engagement can reshape predictions, narratives, and emotional patterns. It encourages an active, participatory stance toward life, where observation, experimentation, and deliberate attention become tools for transformation. Socially, this perspective fosters empathy and understanding. Recognizing that every individual is operating from predictive models that generate the experience of self highlights the relativity of perception, belief, and behavior. It encourages patience, openness, and curiosity in interactions, understanding that others' responses, patterns, and identities are emergent, dynamic, and updatable just like our own. Spirituality, philosophy, and ethics also gain new dimensions when identity is understood as malleable. Concepts of freedom, purpose, and moral responsibility take on dynamic qualities, reflecting the ongoing construction of experience and the role of conscious engagement in shaping the self. The possibilities for learning, growth, and transformation are intertwined with the predictive, constructive nature of consciousness, highlighting that the boundaries of what is possible for any individual are not fixed but continuously negotiable. Ultimately, embracing the malleable nature of the self allows for a profound reorientation of life. It emphasizes process over product, curiosity over certainty, exploration over fixation, and active engagement over passive assumption. It opens a pathway to greater resilience, creativity, empathy, and self-understanding, revealing that identity is not a limitation imposed by biology or circumstance, but a generative system capable of growth, adaptation, and transformation. The recognition that you are not fixed but emergent encourages experimentation with thought, behavior, and experience, fostering a life that is expansive, flexible, and deeply aligned with the adaptive potential of the human mind.